Welcome back. We're breaking down a submission that uses scripture to critique the very heated public discourse around the Charlie controversy.
Right, and the writer does a great job laying out a theological base for their argument. Let's just jump right into how we can make this defense even more impactful.
Okay, so first up, the material makes a powerful case for ethical discourse by using those scriptural receipts. But, its overall credibility is challenged by the adoption of some excessive, highly personalized diagnostic language against the opponent.
I see that too. That's the real dilemma here. The weakness is that the piece uses these are deeply charged ad hominem labels.
Yeah, things like narcissistic, psychopathic drift.
Exactly, or demonic. And while you feel the passion, it risks making the speaker sound just as reactive as the person they're criticizing.
You end up mirroring the character assassination tactics you're trying to stand against.
You do. And it dilutes the perceived objectivity that the whole biblical framework is meant to provide.
So it's a tricky balance, right? How do you call out really bad behavior without, getting dragged into the mud yourself?
Well, the suggestion here is to recenter the whole critique, move it firmly back onto the principles of conduct and truth-seeking that come from Scripture.
So the opponent's actions become less of a personal diagnosis and more of a case study?
A functional example of behavior to be avoided. That's the key.
So practically, what does that look like on the page?
Well, for one, you reduce the use of subjective psychological labels. No more narcissist.
Okay.
And instead of saying something like, all she wants to do is continuously lie, you focus the critique on how her specific actions,
like referencing secret sources,
or that a friend came to her in a dream. You take those specific things and show how they violate a godly standard of evidence.
You make Deuteronomy 19:15 the metric.
Exactly. It proves the conduct is bad, not just that you think the person is bad.
That's a really important pivot. Shifting from who is speaking to how they are speaking. Okay, so let's talk about the substance of the claims then.
Right.
The argument successfully establishes criteria for biblical speech with verses about reviling and slander, but it really needs to expand and deepen its analysis on the requirements for genuine biblical investigation.
That's a key gap, I think. The whole conflict is about seeking truth around a potential crime, a murder.
Mm-hmm.
But the scriptural analysis focuses so heavily on communication ethics, like Ephesians 4:29, it leaves that promise of exploring what truth-seeking really looks like a bit underdeveloped.
Yeah, the foundational verses are there. You see Exodus 23:1, you see Deuteronomy 19:15.
But they aren't fully woven together into a clear, actionable methodology for how you should evaluate claims.
So we need to pull those evidentiary verses forward. The suggestion is pretty clear then. Use those specific evidence-based scriptures to build a really robust, biblically derived framework.
A framework for critical evaluation, yeah.
One that clearly separates corroborated evidence from, sensational narratives.
And you have to be crystal clear about what that standard is. Expand the discussion of Deuteronomy 19:15. A single witness shall not suffice.
Right.
That becomes a practical guideline. Any claim based only on unnamed sources or, mystical insight like the dream
has to be seen as non-credible.
At least under a biblical standard of evidence.
That's it. You frame the distinction really clearly. Allie Beth Stuckey's approach is superior not because she's just being nicer, but because her conduct holds to a higher evidentiary standard.
And that's much more compelling than the opponent's reliance on what you rightly call conspiracy soap opera drama.
It makes the argument about a superior methodology, not just a superior temperament, and that's powerful.
It is, which actually leads into the third point. This material is trying to solve one of the trickiest political problems, which is wrapped up in that biblical dichotomy of answering a fool according to his folly and then not answering a fool according to his folly.
Ah, yes, the Proverbs paradox. The submission introduces this tension, but it doesn't quite explain how the subject's response successfully navigates it.
I agree. The writer correctly points out that Stuckey chose a biblical reproach instead of going tit for tat. But then the piece says she's answering a fool according to her own folly, without really explaining the mechanism.
Right. How did she answer the folly without just adopting the opponent's low standard of engagement? That's the missing piece.
So the specific action item is to clarify that mechanism, show how her use of scripture, those biblical receipts, is the right response.
It needs to demonstrate that her answer is aimed at the folly itself.
The bad conduct, the poor methodology.
Exactly. And it's using an external standard, the Bible, instead of just becoming another retaliatory personal attack.
So to give the listeners some actionable examples, You can specifically connect her rejection of a detailed fact check with a decision to not answer the fool according to his folly.
Because that avoids the endless mudslinging over details.
Right. Then you explain that her response actually answers the accusation of not caring by completely reframing the debate around a godly standard of conduct.
She shifts the entire ground of engagement.
She moves it away from the opponent's usual tactics that have, usually worked for her.
This is great. Okay, so to summarize, we focused on 3 key areas for maximizing impact. First, rebalancing the critique away from that character diagnosis and toward a principled behavioral analysis.
Second, strengthening the biblical criteria for investigative truth-seeking, really using Deuteronomy 19:15 as a core framework.
And finally, elaborating on the distinction of how using Scripture successfully navigates that answering a fool trap.
The foundation of this argument is incredibly strong. Our advice is to apply these suggestions, substitute the psychological labels with objective behavioral critique, establish that multi-witness evidentiary framework, and then clarify the mechanism of the biblical response.
We really encourage you to implement these changes and submit your revised work back in again for a follow-up critique.
We're excited to see the next draft.